Thanks very much. I'm delighted to welcome three excellent speakers to talk to us about how we can achieve economic growth through improving productivity skills within our workforce and our economy. We have Professor B.J. Sharma, who's the Vice Chancellor of Amity University, Gurgaon, in India. That's near Delhi, for those of you who don't know the geography of India. Philip McCann from the University of Manchester, and Philip Hendricks, who's the Group Operations Director from Mighty PLC. Welcome, the three of you, and thank you very much for your time today. Next, please. As you're aware, the world economy is recovering from COVID and achieving growth whilst facing the challenges of the economic shock from this, and obviously two major conflicts, one in Europe and one in the Middle East, as well as climate change. There is a lot of there's a lot happening and a lot of challenges within the economy. Helping us to address this are the opportunities that arise from a new phase of technological change through digitization and the use of artificial intelligence. So around the world, countries are realizing that skills are the key to addressing the big issues and driving domestic economic growth at both a macro level and commercial success in individual businesses. And there's some, if we move to the next, please. And when we're talking about productivity skills in the context of today, there's a wide range of skills, both at the strategic level and managerial level, some of which connect through each other. And if you want any more information on those types of skills, they're available on our website, and there's a link on the bottom of the slide, and we will send the slides out following that. But strategically, we've got to have the leadership and the ability to communicate, develop strategy, be creative, and manage our talent, and particularly be able to manage the changes that are coming from the digitization of everything we do in AI. And that's common. Even in our middle managers, we need the same sort of ability. We're all facing that enormous challenge of the opportunity of the technology, but also how do we best deploy it? How do we best take it on board? We've got to be able to manage our people. We've got to be able to develop our skills. We've got to be able to, no matter what level, be able to communicate and bring people on, be able to market well, continuously improve what we're doing, and manage the changes that we've got, as well as move towards a sustainable world where our economies are compliant with net zero and are sustainable, and the way we work helps to achieve that goal. So a lot of different skills needed, a lot of different approaches needed at all sorts of different levels in our workforce. Next, please. I'd now like to hand over to Professor B.J. Sharma, who'll talk for about 20 minutes, and each of our speakers will talk for 20 minutes, and then we'll have a panel discussion at the end. So first is Professor Sharma, and I'd like to hand over now to him. When you want the slides moved, Professor Sharma, if you say next. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Yeah. Thank you so much indeed for the opportunity to connect to such an elite group at a time when we all are focusing our attention to how to drive the productivity movement in our respective nations. As Graham has already alerted that we are in great times of opportunity, but also the times of disruption, which is taking place because of rapid advancement of technology on one hand, and the challenges that we have, including the global challenges post-COVID. The economic recovery, of course, is very, very important for ushering a new era of productivity. And here we are becoming more and more conscious of the fact that it is not just the people, but the technology advancement, the scientific discovery, and also technology innovations that would be the guiding and driving force behind, in fact, improving productivity in future. And therefore, at this time, when we discuss the the productivity skills, it would be important for us to focus our attention to some new paradigm that has been created by the disruption on one hand and exciting times of technology innovations on the other. I would surely be very happy to share with you my thought on this subject. Graham, can I go over and share my presentation right now? Yes, there you are. So uh, in my presentation, I thought let me quickly share with you some of my thoughts on how productivity movement, in fact, has been pursued so far and where we are, especially with respect to India, from where I am speaking today. In India, there is a tremendous amount of excitement about the economic recovery that has taken place post-COVID, and we are looking upward for boosting our nation's economy by looking at GDP and the growth of GDP in our economy. We are seeing that great gains are ahead. And in this respect, let me go to the next slide if I can from here. If we look at the historical perspective of creation of the wealth of the nations, as Adam Smith has warned us, in fact, right in the beginning, a man grows rich by employing a multitude of manufacturers. He grows poor by maintaining a multitude of menial servants. The labor of the latter, however, has its value and deserves its rewards as well. Such like alert which has come at a time when focus of attention was more on those who are highly skilled and engaged in manufacturing and in pushing the layers of productivity and profit, of course, which is important. But it's also important, perhaps, what Adam Smith was trying to say in those days: how do we take care of the vast humanity that we aspire to serve through the economic growth of the nation that includes very many who may not be part and parcel of the manufacturing system. With this kind of backdrop in mind, when we look, next slide, please, if I can get, okay, there you are. We also look at, in fact, what Bill Smith, another Bill, the father of Six Sigma, has said, that productivity is much more important than revenues and profits of the organization, because profit only reflects the end result, whereas productivity reflects the increased efficiency as well as effectiveness of business policies and processes. Moreover, it also enables a business to find out its strengths and weaknesses. And therefore, the importance of productivity in the change context cannot be overemphasized. And we need to cause this revolution even now when technology advancement as well as the effectiveness of the systems of manufacturing and service sector as well as agriculture are driving a new agenda in this respect. When we look at the next one, go next. Yeah, there you are. Productivity. Well, when we look at the productivity in today's context, we find that productive growth is the key driver of sustainable income growth and poverty reduction. And this is becoming more and more, in fact, visible in a country like ours, where we find that the rapid gains on the economic recovery after post-COVID has also resulted into reduction of poverty. And it affects on the human welfare are enormous. While economies agree on the importance of productivity, its measurement and drivers remain elusive, as said by Mr. Hugo Panija, the Piquet Chair in Finance and Development at the Graduate Institute in Geneva, who is also Vice President of the CEPR. Moving further, next one. If we look at the the emerging trends of productivity over the last many years, especially after the productivity movement gained its importance in 1980-81, we find that the advanced economies of the world have suffered in respect of the drop in productivity because of the great financial crisis that has taken place. And thereafter, of course, another very important advent, and that is COVID-19, that has shaken the confidence of the economies of the advanced nations around the world. But the point to note here is that the rapidly emerging economies, have witnessed, in fact, have managed to make remarkable progress over the last 25 years. The development, particularly in China and India and other highly productive emerging economies, have some common threads, such as we find that there has been tremendous boosting of capital investment. At least here in India, I'm clearly visiting this happening in terms of accelerated urbanization. It is also making service and construction sectors booming at a time when other nations, advanced nations of the world, perhaps are looking for more productive and capital investment in their economy. More productive, the modernization of the manufacturing also is being benefited by the boosting of the capital investment that is taking place. And I'm witnessing this in areas like automotive engineering, defense technologies, and a whole lot of new and emerging technologies in which the manufacturing sector is trying to take strides because of the availability of more investment in this area. On top of that, we are also witnessing in a country like India structural reforms which are facilitating the ease of business. And these reforms are directly aimed at productive economic growth, so that we are in a position to see the capital investment that we make in infrastructure and in a whole lot of other sectors, including the education and training, in which we are making very heavy investment, both from the public as well as from the private ownership. I find that the 7 IITs earlier, of which I was a part till 1990, myself at IIT Delhi, have now grown to something like 23 in the country. And there has been a tremendous rise of the institutions of higher end education, research, and skilling like the IITs in India. In the same way, the Indian Institute of Management's IIMs, which were part and parcel of great education and management, they have also grown from 7 to something like 23 during the last 10 years itself. And this is remarkable in terms of investment that the government is making in higher end education, skilling, and in research, actually, in a country like India here. And we need to now see what can be done both in the advanced economies as well as in the rapidly emerging economies of the world. When we speak for the whole of the world as a productivity, world academy of productivity sciences, we need to now look at how the advanced economies of the world can boost their economies by making greater investment in the knowledge economy, which could result into a rise of more productive engagement of people in manufacturing in high-tech areas, as well as some of the service sector which currently has shifted toward the emerging economies can also be captured. And that is where strategic planning and investment would be required, in fact. And we in the academy can look at this aspect and look at both the sides and see what can be done in the advanced economies on one hand and the emerging economies like India on the other. Here in India, going to the next one, we find that productivity growth in various sectors is highly promising. The biggest gain which I'm witnessing here is in the service sector, where we find that today India's GDP is largely coming from the service sector, and this sector is also employing 25% of the total workforce here in India. And we are also looking at manufacturing, which is employing 22% of our workforce at the moment, while agriculture remains as a major employer in India. On the other hand, we find that in the advanced economies like USA, the service sector accounts for 80%, and 79% people are engaged into the service sector. Manufacturing, on the other hand, is 19%, 12%, engaging 19% workforce, and the agriculture surely is much a smaller component, both in China as well as USA. So there is a decrease on the agriculture side, but the employment in a country like India is still quite heavy on the agriculture side. As the time goes by, more and more investment in agriculture will drive, in fact, the productivity of the agriculture sector here, while at the same time we are constantly looking at what can be done in advanced manufacturing, especially the new Industry 4.0 systems for a variety of sectors, including automotive sector, to boost the employment in this sector here. But service sector will continue to thrive actually on the success that we have registered so far. Moving further to the next one quickly. The labor productivity growth during the last 13 years, which I picked up from the APO productivity data book of 2015, I find that the Indian productivity has certainly shown promising trends of going up to 5.2% actually, as against actually other economies which are listed here. The benchmark, of course, is USA from the advanced economies, and China, of course, has shown the remarkable improvement in productivity by the investment that they have made. And all this has happened during the last nearly 25 years in China. And India is maintaining, of course, a steady march towards higher productivity. Next one. The labor productivity growth in India measured in terms of the growth of the real GDP per person employed for the two-time period shown here, so that it was 3% during 2005 to 2005, while it has increased to 6.7% during the period from 2005 to 2013. It may be noted that India's labor productivity growth during this period was also the second highest among the 20 APO member countries, maybe the highest being in China. The labor productivity growth during 2000 to 2013 in India has all along been better than the comparative position respect of benchmark countries like United States, except China. This accounts for the progress achieved by the Indian economy through higher global productivity during the decade of globalization. A lot more has changed after 2013 with the kind of structural reform that have happened here. Next one. There you are. In fact, the total factor productivity growth in various sectors of economy, including agriculture, industry, and service sector, also gives us reason to believe that it is the service sector which is achieving, of course, higher productivity levels now, and we need to capitalize on the capability of the talented workforce created from the institutions and universities in this respect. And looking at the agriculture sector also, here also, in fact, a tremendous amount of skilling of the new workforce in agriculture, and technology integration in agriculture is very much on the card that we have today. Moving further, the circular economy in India is now surfacing and making its headway, giving us reason to believe that as the time goes by, we shall be focusing on preserving our natural resources by ensuring that much bigger recycle and reuse of the natural resources is employed in our circular economy. And it is with this principle of preserve and enhance natural capital by controlling finite stocks and balancing renewable resource flow is something with which the circular economy of India and its mission is currently engaged into. Going to the next one, there you are. We are also looking at optimizing resource yield by circulating products and components and materials at their highest utility at all the time to reduce the fresh material consumption, and also preserving, in fact, the great biodiversity and sustainability that we now wish to serve. In this respect, it would be absolutely necessary for us to invest more heavily on skilling our people as for the new circular economy, but also to invest heavily on path-breaking science and technology innovations of the kind that are required to make the circular economy work. And it is this agenda which is also gaining currency in India. Going next one. We need to foster system effectiveness by revealing, in fact, designing our negative externalities, and also to prepare the mindset of the people for a greater acceptance actually of the products and services which are created on the strength of the circular economy. I was overjoyed last time when I visited USA to meet my son's and his family to buy from the market a pair of trousers which were produced in fact by from the recirculated polymers, and I was very happy to see to look at the quality. It was difficult for me to recognize it in one go unless I looked at the label of it. So the quality of products which are being produced by the circular economy today are giving us reason to believe that there would be a larger acceptance, and this will also reduce the burden that we are currently putting on the nature. Moving further, next one. Well, if we look at the circular economy in India, it's a new way of creating value, and it is being seen as increasing productivity and to integrate productivity and sustainability together in various sectors of the economy. Circular economy works by extending product lifetime through improved design and servicing and relocating waste from the end of the supply place to the new product development, utilizing recycle and reuse materials. Indian businesses are well placed to lead the way in the transition to circular economy, and 5 focus areas that we have identified for this purpose include build circular economy knowledge and capacity, and that is where the skills and education and research, also skills actually of the kind that are required to make the productivity growth uh, higher in the circular economy, alongside with achieving higher sustainability index, in fact, would be required, and new ways of preparing manpower and the skilled manpower from the universities and the new research to make the circular economy work would be very much required. We need to foster innovative product design by recycling and reuse, and this is becoming as a new phenomenon. In my own university, I find a tremendous focus on recycle and various sectors, including the fashion sector, adopt circular economy principles in policy design, strategy, and growth, integrate circular economy with other businesses, and invest in circular economy opportunities. These are some of the thoughts. The last one, uh, next one. If I could conclude by embarking on a circular economy transformation, India would create economic, environmental, and social value for its businesses and population. And that way, the cause of growth of economy alongside with sustainability will be well served. Circular economy could benefit India to the extent of US dollar 624 billion annual value created by 2050 are some of the figures presented before us by the policymakers. And this would be amounting to 30% of India's current GDP being aligned to the circular economy as per the Ellen MacArthur Foundation report of 2016. The 3 focus areas for India that have been identified in which the work has begun here is increased urbanization. We are looking at the city regions now and looking at how, in fact, a new India of our dream could be created by increased urbanization, but it is going to put serious pressure on water resources and also air quality of the kind that we are currently facing. Similarly, construction activity will be finding a major boost. Food and agriculture is another sector, and mobility and vehicle manufacturing another one. The new and emerging technologies such as artificial intelligence, intelligent and smart robotics, and path-breaking science and technology innovation shall continue to demand a greater investment in skilling the workforce for employability and productive growth. And that is where, in fact, much more is happening, in fact, in the universities around. We are integrating artificial intelligence and smart intelligent devices in all sectors of our education, including, in fact, going to look at how this could be integrated in our businesses and management education, in our law education, education in applied sciences, and of course in engineering, design, and manufacturing. So a lot of this will drive the new agenda, and that way the assurance for building great economies for the nation would be there. I thought this is what I should say in the beginning and would be happy to respond to any other point that could emerge from the discussion. Next one. There you are. So thank you so much for the opportunity, Mr. Graham, for sharing some of my thoughts, and I'll definitely be working with you and the WAPS to integrate the concepts of integrating productivity and sustainability together to drive the agenda for the new economies of nations around the world. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Professor Sharma. That was an interesting insight to India and the concept of the circular economy in such the biggest nation on earth in terms of population now. Thank you very much. I'd now like to introduce Phil Hendricks. Philip McCann. Oh, we've got Phil. Yeah, okay. Well, we got I guess it doesn't matter in truth. We've got two Philips. So I think Phil, are you there? Are you there? Can I?
Which Phil?
Sorry, Phil McCann. Yes, somebody's reversed the order. Phil McCann. I can't find Phil McCann.
Yes, I'm here.
Yeah. Hi, Philip.
Hi. I thought
Yeah,
you were talking to another Phil because
apologies.
That's no problem at all. I've sent through, Graham. I've sent through my slides to your colleagues, Lucy and Stephanie. Yeah. So, okay. So
you should see them on screen. Yeah.
Okay. So does somebody else want to?
If you say next, they'll move. Stephanie will move them on.
Okay, that's probably easy if we do it that way, is it?
Yeah, I think it is. Yeah.
From your perspective. Okay, so I've got about 15, 20 minutes, right?
Yep. Thank you very much.
Okay, so you can hear me nice and clear, right?
Very clear. Thank you, Philip.
Okay, well, just firstly, also, Graham, thanks to you and your colleagues for inviting me to come and talk about these issues. I work at the Productivity Institute at the University of Manchester, which is a UK-wide research initiative. It's a huge research initiative with also many stakeholders internationally in different countries, different institutions. But the headquarters is at the University of Manchester, where I'm based. And the issues of productivity are, these are issues which are resonating in many, many different arenas in the UK, because productivity growth in the UK since the global financial crisis over the last 15 years has been remarkably low. It's been the lowest period of productivity growth in modern history in the UK. And that has enormous implications. But a big part of the story that I'm going to talk about is the geographical aspects of those productivity differences. And then where do the work, skills, training agendas fit into that problem? So if you can go to the first slide, please. I think it's Stephanie, you're looking after the slides. Thank you. So the first thing is what we call the UK regional national productivity problem. The UK has a major productivity growth problem over the last 15 years. And I've argued in things I've written, including some large books, as well as many journal articles. It's to do with the interaction, the strange geography of the UK. It's extremely monocentric. Everything goes through the core region, i.e. London. The asymmetric shocks, the differential shocks of globalization on different parts of the UK, and a problem of governance that the UK has become ultra centralized. In the UK, for many years, people thought that somehow centralization was a good thing. That devolving decision-making and power leads to kind of bad policy making, bad control over finances. And at the same time, there was also an assumption that there was always a kind of a trade-off, equity, efficiency trade-off in terms of centralization versus decentralization. These are widespread types of thinking that were evident in places like the Treasury, many parts of the UK government system, what we call Whitehall for many years. But we know internationally now, looking at OECD-wide evidence, none of these assumptions have any veracity. They don't hold at all. What we do know is that there's no particular growth relationship in terms of national growth vis-a-vis the structure of governance systems, whether they're more devolved, decentralized, or more centralized. There's no relationship with aggregate economic growth nationally, but there is a relationship with the geography of that growth inside a country. So more devolved societies in terms of governance tend to have more equal growth trajectories in more parts of the same country. So in a sense, more communities are participating in that economic development process, whereas in more centralized governance systems, the geography of those growth processes tends to be much more skewed. So you start to get an insider-outsider set of relationships where parts of the country are very much enjoying the benefits and of the prosperity growth, whereas other parts of the country, in a sense, are being left behind. Next slide, please. And the UK today is one of the most highly centralized governance systems in the industrialized world. And at the same time, what we also have is an extremely low trust in central government by the population. It ranked 34th in the OECD, so big below countries like Portugal, Greece, Italy, even Brazil. And this, it seems to me, is an extremely risky situation to be in, where we're extremely centralized in terms of how we govern. So central government plays an overwhelming role in the UK in comparison to most countries, and yet trust in central government is extraordinarily low. Whereas trust in much more devolved and local government in the UK is much higher. In the UK, this 4-decade-long process of centralisation has meant that the more prosperous parts of the country in and around London have grown much faster than the rest of the country, and indeed are much bigger in terms of in full economic terms than you would expect from statistical distributions looking at other countries. In a sense, the economy in the south of England is about twice the size of what you would expect looking at most other countries. Citizens, not surprisingly, in the UK tend to prefer much more local government, much closer to the action, and particularly anything below around 2 million, something like that. Larger areas of governance, there's a lot of resistance to this. I'll come back to this later. Okay, next slide, please. Paul Krugman famously in 1994 said productivity isn't everything, but in the long run it's almost everything. I still think that is true. There's just an overwhelming amount of evidence that tells us that basic statement is correct. Places with high productivity levels and high productivity growth tend to have high prosperity broadly defined, better health services, better education services, better infrastructure, better responses to climate change, better longevity, health outcomes, and so on. And of course, things like well-being, life satisfaction, and so on. But parts of the UK are extraordinarily low in terms of productivity and prosperity, much lower than national authorities, including the media, government, and so on, until very recently have become aware of. So half the UK today is poorer than the poorest US states of Mississippi and Alabama, poorer than the Czech Republic, about the same level as Slovakia, for example. That's about half the country. And the fact that an over-centralized governance system has not really addressed these issues, not thought about them, is itself a cause for what we call the geography of discontent, the kind of populism backlash against institutional systems. And these, of course, challenge the role and the efficacy of government. Next slide, please. And just to quickly show, you can see, just looking at these levels, the orange lines represent the productivity levels of different parts of the UK, the big regions of the UK, and the grey lines represent the other regions. And what you can see is enormous dispersion. London is far, far ahead of the rest of the country, followed by the southeast of England, which is the hinterland of London, and then the regions close to London, the east and the southwest. Whereas other regions, if you take Northern Ireland, Wales, and the northeast of England, for example, what you see is the productivity levels in places like the northeast of England are really no different to what they were almost 2 decades ago. There's been effectively no productivity growth in those parts of the country, and it was primarily related to the shock of the global financial crisis. Pre-crisis, growth was pretty strong and stable in all parts of the UK. Post-crisis, it's a very different reality. Next slide, please. And the problem is that there's no silver bullet. A lot of people say, well, it's a problem of education. Other people say, no, it's a problem of infrastructure. Some people say it's a problem of foreign investment, something to do with our cities. In reality, it's not about any of these things individually. It's about a whole series of things which are feeding off each other and interacting with each other in a, I would say, not very constructive or not very helpful manner. But the reality is that the country has been basically disconnecting internally on multiple economic indicators and indices. And I've written extensively on this. So the problem with the centralized governance system, the country itself is becoming much more decoupled, much more decoupled and less connected internally. And if you have a highly centralized governance system, that's like the worst scenario that you face. Next slide, please. And you can just see in terms of map terms, this decoupling, this separating, has a very strong what we call a core periphery logic. So the economy in and around the London area and the south of England versus the rest of the country, it's a very, very strong what we call a core periphery structure. Next slide, please. And these differences in productivity are reflected in many, many aspects of prosperity, including incomes, wealth, employment status, job tenure, health indices, quality of life, well-being, and so on. I've just listed many of them here. So Paul Krugman's point about productivity is not everything. It's just that in the long run, it's almost everything. I think basically it is correct, and there's a lot of evidence underpinning this. Next slide again. Going back to the 1970s, 1980s, early 1990s, the assumption, the thinking was that if you boost part of the economy, such as London, for example, then you'll just generate a lot of knowledge spread effects, best practice, as long as you've got good regulatory structures and they're properly enforced, competition regulation, and so on. As long as those things are working well, then all the benefits from growth in one country will rapidly diffuse to other parts of the country. And that thinking was based on actually what you see in the post-war era, the second half of the 20th century. That was a reality that almost all OECD countries faced. There's a lot of data on this. The problem is from about 1988, the UK was the first country in the industrialized world to change what happens internally, to go from that spread effect type of reality that we call a convergence framework to what we call a divergence framework, where parts of the economy are effectively dislocating, decoupling from other parts of the country. And today, Andy Haldane, the former chief economist of the Bank of England, describes the UK economy as an economy which is a hub with no spokes, that those transmission effects from the core parts of the country in and around London just simply don't diffuse or spread to other parts of the country. So if you go to visit London today, you'll see there's tremendously dynamic areas, or places like Oxford, Cambridge, Guildford, Reading, places near to the London area. But if you go to other parts of the country, it feels like you're stepping back 2 or 3 decades. Well, in reality, when you look at the data, that's precisely what you are doing. Next slide. And I'll just run through these slides here. These slides, basically, they're indicators of interregional inequality across using different measures, but the comparison is Germany versus the UK. So the lines which are broadly sloping down represent Germany, so the post-reunification Germany from the early 1990s onwards, and the solid lines upward sloping represent the UK, and they form an X pattern, an X shape. What this tells us is that since German reunification 33 years ago, Germany's been spending a lot of resources on what in the UK we call levelling up, basically trying to stimulate activity in the weaker parts of the country as the country became reunified. And that process has led to a much lower levels of interregional inequality in the German economy than the UK economy. Indeed, the UK economy became more unequal than the German economy around the time of the global financial crisis, there or thereabouts, as you can see here. And on some measures today, the UK is more unequal interregionally than Germany was at the time of reunification. So if you just flip through the next 2 or 3 slides, you'll see exactly the same pattern. It's an X shape. Next slide again. And next slide again. And next slide again. And what those four slides have just shown us is this X-shaped relationship that some countries, through purposeful intervention, become much more narrow in terms of interregional productivity imbalances, and whereas the UK has had a very laissez-faire approach and governance centralisation, and that's led to an increasing disparities interregionally. So the UK on many levels is today more regionally unbalanced, as I say, than Germany was just immediately post-unification, which of course is very hard for a lot of people to imagine, but actually that's what the data tells us. What this tells us here, there's different types of places in the UK. So if we just go to the next slide, Yeah, this is a better one. So this is the distribution of different types of places in the UK using an OECD characterization, a methodology of different types of places, large metro areas, rural areas, non-metro areas close to small towns, others which are close to small cities. There's a whole standardization process here that the OECD do. But what these graphs here show us is that in a typical economy, the economic geography of a typical economy would tell us that productivity will be growing with bigger places. So larger cities should be more productive than medium-sized cities. Medium-sized cities should be more productive than large towns than small towns than villages, and so on. In the UK, when you look at these relationships, all those curves are basically flat instead of upward sloping. So let's go to the next slide as well. You see the same pattern, they're basically flat. Next slide. This is using a slightly different measure, but this includes London, which is the dot in the top right hand. Take London out, go to the next slide. And that line is flat again. Go to the next slide. Flat again, and the next slide. So what we have is a very strange reality in the UK case that while we know that there are these big interregional inequalities and we're struggling trying to work out what they are, we also know they're somehow related to governance centralization processes, whereby all of the industrialized world has been devolving over the last 40 years. The UK is the outlier. It's been centralizing. It's taken a different approach. And part of the implication of that process is that we don't have scale productivity relationships in UK cities. And we are the only country in the industrialized world where that is true. Once you take London out from all of those plots, scatter plots we call them, that you've just seen, there are simply no scale productivity relationships. Bigger cities are not more productive than smaller places. They should be, but they're not. Places which are denser should be more productive than places which are more sparsely populated. They're not. And this is a huge paradox in the UK case. It's a real conundrum, trying to understand why. Now, there are some explanations you get in the media that London is kind of the motor of the economy. It drags everyone along. Actually, that is not true. The economy internally has been decoupling for 30 years. London's not been taking the rest of the UK with it at all. Other people sort of try to blame London and say London's kind of a dark star, like a black hole. London sucks all the goodies out of the rest of the country. Actually, there's no evidence of this either. Interregional mobility of labour, interregional migration in the UK today is about the same as what it was 40 years ago, and it hasn't increased. There's no. These are kind of political narratives which are very common, but they don't help us to think through the problem. Next slide, please. And so these kind of narratives they don't get us very far, but you often hear them in the press. In reality, if you look at the UK case, if you take the highest ends of the skills spectrum, the graduates, university graduates, versus the lowest of the spectrum would be the NEETs, not in employment, education, or training. In the UK, the variation between regions in terms of both the most highly skilled group, the graduates, and the lowest educated groups, the NEETs, those variations are actually very small in the UK, precisely because the education system is so centralised. Whereas the productivity variations and the prosperity variations in the UK are enormous by the standards of OECD countries. So you often hear people say, well, the prosperous parts of the country, because that's where all the clever kids are, all the highly graduated people, highly qualified people. But actually, as I say, those variations are very, very small in the UK in comparison to international benchmarks. What is more puzzling is graduate earnings. So people who are highly educated through a university system, for example, they don't achieve economies of scale. You don't get these scale-related growth effects in cities, as I've just shown you with those flat lines. You don't get those in the UK outside of London, and that is the central conundrum. Why is that? Why do cities in the Netherlands, which are much smaller, or even in places like Finland, which are tiny in comparison, or New Zealand, why do they generate economies of scale also for people at the kind of graduate and postgraduate level, but it doesn't take place in the UK looking outside of London? That is a real fundamental puzzle. And coming on top of this puzzle are also these enormous challenges. If you look at the recent Pissarides review, the Institute for the Future of Work, Pissarides as in Sir Chris Pissarides, Nobel Prize winner. You look at the technological disruption indicators which are coming on stream, along with the green transition challenges. And what you see is that the balance of opportunities and risks heavily favours in the UK the places which are already prosperous. So how do you think about skills related issues to start getting those cities in the weaker parts of the country to be more productive? How you build scale productivity relationships? This is the central challenge, and we are struggling in the UK enormously. Next slide, please. I would argue that a big feature here is to do with governance. The UK has been centralising so significantly over 4 decades in a way that other countries haven't been doing, and I think what's happened is that we've lost the ability within our governance systems to tailor policy so it's appropriate to help localities respond to the particular challenges they face. Next slide, please. The UK system is very much a pyramid. It's a top-down, very hierarchical governance system. It's what we call space blind. It has almost no regional variations in it at all. And this has been, I think it's been largely ineffective as the country's been decoupling internally. We haven't had a governance system which has allowed for flexible and tailored responses to the challenges facing those localities. And this has represented a kind of a knowledge failure because there's no meso level institutions in the middle. And I think this has been particularly damaging in the case of skills and employment pathways. Next slide, please. Countries which are more devolved, such as federal systems, or even unitary countries which are very bottom up, such as the Netherlands or the Nordic countries, federal countries like Australia, Germany, Canada, or countries which have decentralized, unitary states which have heavily decentralized, such as France and Japan, particularly France, they are in a much better position to develop policies which are much more closely tailored to the local realities. Whereas the UK, we've had 40 years of going in the other direction, which I would argue has very much been going in the wrong direction. Next slide, please. Building much more meso level, so not super local, not very fragmented, but institutions which can develop policies and implement them on a bigger scale. So I'm thinking around the 3 to 5 million mark in terms of population, which would be about the OECD average for these kind of things. The advantages they have is that you can develop skills programs, for example, or training programs by bringing all the stakeholders together. So the main employers, the research institutions, the universities, the training colleges, the trade unions, the small business associations, you can start to bring people together to work out policy settings which are going to be appropriate for the local economy, depending on the kind of employers and those employment pathways and trajectories which are coming on stream in those localities. That is relatively easy to do in a country like Australia or Canada or Germany. It's almost impossible to do it in the UK until very recently. And I think the employment skills related one has been the most challenging of all, probably. Next slide, please. At the moment, the skills pipeline institutional system, as many of you will know, it's extremely fragmented. In some parts of the country, it's probably a little short of something which is chaotic. Whereas in other countries such as Germany, Switzerland in particular, you have a strong coordinating role. There is a meso level institution in terms of governance, whether it's the Länder or states or provinces or cantons in the case of Switzerland. You have meso levels of governance, but you also have coordinating institutions. In those countries in particular, the chambers of commerce have extremely important legal roles and responsibilities to help to link the skills providers and the pipeline of people who are graduating through those skills training processes to the demands coming from the other side, from the employers. This is an ongoing process. In the UK, there's almost no institutions that play that role. There's no legal basis for anything. So a lot of what takes place in the UK is very ad hoc, whereas in other countries, there's a much more structured and much more systematic way of thinking about this. You've also got a much more flexible education system, particularly in the US or New Zealand, for example, where you can have college degree programs, 1 or 2 year degrees. You can go back to college later on to complete a degree and to upscale. Again, in the UK system, it's extremely rigid. It's based on certification, as all of our education system is. And it's very hard to tailor these things to the local needs and local demands of local employers. Next slide. I think I'm just about at the end of my slides. And so this is kind of the arena in terms of linking skills training pathways to the productivity problems at the regional level in the UK. This is where the discussions are at. We've got a conundrum in terms of not having the growth productivity scale relationships. It's very difficult to tailor training and skills development pathways to local needs and local demands. But superimposed on all of that, there's now a rush to so-called level up in the UK to encourage devolution in terms of governance. But a lot of what is taking place in the UK is being done in a very hurried manner. It's being done in a kind of a rush for political reasons. And the difficulty is that then you're going to get fragmentation, lack of coordination, fragmentation because it's not properly thought out. And you'll have people rowing in the opposite direction to each other. And at the same time, you'll have unbalanced, unweighted institutional systems where you've got effectively a whale, which is the London economy, surrounded by a series of small fish. The London economy is bigger than the next 14 city economies in the UK added together. So we need a much more structured way of thinking about the architecture of governance in the UK, and in the skills-related pathways, how can that be articulated in a manner which allows skills training policy to be tailored to localities. So I'll stop there, Graham. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Philip. That was very interesting. I've been on an all-parliamentary group on the skills system for 2030. Interested in all the debates about devolution. Even where we are trying to devolve, we don't seem to be doing it very well. So I find that really very, very interesting. And perhaps in the discussion, we might talk to Professor Sharma, because the way it happens in India is somewhat different. So we might be able to draw some differences. Right. Thank you very much. Phil Hendricks is the next speaker. He's the group director for Mighty PLC. Welcome, Philip. Yeah, I think you're going to give us an industry view.
Yes, very much so. And I suppose before I jump into that, firstly, thank you to Professor Sharma and Professor McCann. I found that very interesting, not least because I'm half German, half Dutch. So it's always nice to hear that my home countries are actually doing something right for a change. My career started in the 90s in India as well, working for General Electric right at the beginning of the huge boom that we've seen in India over the last 30 years. And at that point, we were looking at how can we increase productivity within our silicons divisions across Europe. And that ended up setting up a very large, significant presence in Pune and around Mumbai. And so having started my career there and ending up going through various other countries, spending quite some time as a partner at PwC, then at CBRE, responsible for transformation, and now here at Mighty. I've tried to pull out what I think the latest thinking, and what I hear my colleagues and what I hear my let's call it competitors talk about on a more regular basis. So if we can go to the next slide, a little bit of background first about Mighty. Some people know it, some people won't. It's 4.2 billion in size. It's a significantly large company. It's nearly completely UK focused. We are a facilities transformation business. Started off undertaking cleaning, so you'll probably see our operatives in places like the stations, at hospitals, on a regular basis. But you might also not be aware that we also do a significant amount of engineering, where we look after large buildings such as the Shard, a large part of our public sector estate, including defence locations. And we also secure a large number of areas too. So if you're ever in an A&E ward or find yourself unlucky to be there, you'll notice there are security guards standing around, and a large proportion of those are actually Mighty staff who are keeping not only the patients safe, but also the staff safe. So we are about 65,000 people in the UK, and over the last couple of years, we've been focusing significantly about how we get our apprenticeship scheme up and off the ground. We find that productivity in Mighty, and I've seen this as well at CBRE and other organisations, it is not just about removing people, taking people out of the equation by replacing them with robots and so on, but it's about making sure that we're very clear about what we want to utilise different capabilities and different resources for. So I'll come back to that in a second. The graphic on the right really shows the fact that we've got our engineering, cleaning, security and projects businesses, and we're all focused using technology as a way of identifying where do we want to focus. So from an industry perspective, productivity comes from having a very clear version, single version of the truth, and understanding what steps can we make and what moments do we want to undertake to change the way we do things for a sustainable productivity. I've worked with many organizations when I was a consultant where they were looking at the year end and saying, how do we just slash cost? We need to think about that slightly differently. We need to have a longer view as to where we can land to a better, consistent and sustainable level of productivity. Two other key points on there, and just picking up on what Dr. Sharma was saying, we are aiming to be carbon zero by 2025 and are looking pretty good to achieve that. And we've just launched our 5,000th electric vehicle that we use. I heard both of you say that, you know, there's a significant push towards the circular economy and so on. But actually, going back to my old organization, there was a great study done a couple of weeks ago where PwC spoke to, I think, about 2,500 manufacturers across Europe, and 43% of them said that they feel customers, or have had direct feedback saying that customers want sustainable products and services going forward. Now, that's nice to hear now, but we started this journey a number of years ago, and going down that sustainable route has its impact. So one of the things that I want to talk about today as well is, if you are undertaking the right things, because as an organization and as an executive committee and a board, we believe driving towards the carbon zero emissions by 2025 is the right thing, that also has a knock-on impact on productivity. So when you think about productivity, or when we think about productivity, we need to think about it as a net position, and how some of the more strategic activities we do might in other areas. Can I have the next slide, please? So for me, one of my mantras is output rather than input is key. But productivity within our organization right now is about ensuring that we can get the best outcomes from our 65,000 people that we have around the UK, that they deliver a high quality level of service in a consistent manner, regardless of where they are in the UK. So we talked a little bit about centralization. It's fascinating what Dr. McCann talked about, because we actually see a real benefit in being able to attract staff from all around the UK. If we were limited to just finding people in London, we would find that challenging. However, the biggest challenge we have is sometimes scaling up quickly with the right number of people. So I've just pulled out two areas here on where we focus as Mighty. The first is what we would call our hard services, so our engineering areas. Everyone understands someone in their van, and he or she will go to a site because there's been a call that says X, Y, and Z piece of kit has stopped working effectively. In the past, that would mean that they'd take their toolbox, go and undertake a bit of diagnostic. If it's repairable at the time with the basic tools that they would have with them, they would then fix it there and there. But actually, the vast majority of times when kit in buildings starts to degrade, it's not a case of things just stopping working. It's a case of them deteriorating their capability and their usability over time, to a point after which it very rarely it needs a fix. It's more likely that it needs a significant upgrade or a replacement. Now, for us to be able to drive productivity in this space, we need to ensure that the engineer that's going out on site actually knows what they're likely to face. So we have the ability to monitor a large number of our clients' assets remotely. We can understand through sensor technology whether the vibration in the air conditioning unit, or the heat sensors, or even the power surge sensors can give us a very fair idea as to whether or not that asset is just struggling because there's a part missing, or whether it's actually coming towards its useful end of its life. In fact, some of the really interesting things that we're doing at the moment, and we can come back to that a little later if people are interested, around AI usage, is about doing some proper predictive maintenance. And what we're doing there is, and what we're finding there is that we have now got access to such a huge lake of data with the key trigger points now identified and an AI learning tool over the top, that we're hitting around 90% accuracy in before the engineer even goes out to see the air conditioning unit, whether or not it's likely to just need a visual inspection, whether it needs to have a specific type of fix, or whether it needs replacement. Now, again, coming back to that, the environment question about being carbon neutral, not only do we want to use electric vehicles to go to visit our sites and so on, but if it can mean that we roll one less van, because ahead of time we can speak to our customer and say, this is what we're looking to achieve. We're trying to reduce the amount of time we spend in vans driving around your estate, and we believe this asset with 90% certainty will need replacement. Why don't we buy the replacement parts or the replacement unit, put it in the back of the van, and then if it needs to, we do it there. We're finding that the vast majority of our clients and customers are actually very, very positive about that. They want to be on that journey with us, where we drive efficiency, drive optimization of staff, and drive a quicker turnaround in fixing what they need to do. Now, if we jump to the right-hand side, for example, we've got something there called Merlin. Now, I've brought out the example here about where we are using data aggregation from a security perspective. So using feeds on crime data, on hotspots, on our intelligence monitoring that we have in Northampton, we can help customers and deploy our staff more effectively. Now, what that means is, if we are aware that there is a regular surge of criminality in certain areas at certain times, we can redeploy our resources effectively for that customer, rather than having a thin spread across everywhere to where we believe and are pretty confident we know where the issues are going to be. Now, the nice thing with Merlin is, this is a tool that we've developed in such a way that we can actually use it across multiple capabilities. It's a tool that we also use for our cleaning operatives, that when they go and walk into a room in an office, or onto the warehouse floor in a manufacturing plant, or into a loading bay of a retailer, there are little NFC chips that have been placed around these places, so that we can track how easy, how difficult it is for that individual to clean that space. Now, it's not about saying that someone is higher or lower performing. It's about us understanding what the challenges are that operative has to complete their job. So by pooling all that information, not only can we say that I'm sitting currently in the Shard, that we're on floor 12, it takes an operative somewhat an hour and 20 minutes, and on floor 11, it takes a different operative just an hour. We can start to match the different types of challenges that group might have. So from a cleaning perspective, we know that large volume traffic areas are far harder to keep clean than meeting rooms. In the same way, we know that if you walk around London, most offices are pretty much empty on a Friday. So why would you need a cleaning operative there on that day, when actually what we could do is surge a cleaning operative if there was a significant event in the office on that day. So if I now bring that sort of back to what I was saying right at the beginning, we're using technology right now to help us identify and zoom in on where we can make careful adjustments to where we are placing our staff and what we're asking them to do. Now, someone mentioned, I think it was Dr. Sharma a little while ago, about robotics. We've started to talk about this term cobotics. There are many, many things where we feel our robotics, be it drones, be it our cleaning machines, be it even our remote maintenance capability based up in Manchester, where an engineer can have an Oculus device and be coached by another engineer that's sitting miles away. All of these things are very, very helpful, but it doesn't take time away, or it doesn't reduce the need of an individual being there present on site. A good example of this is the hospital environment. So, and I very much recommend, for those that are interested in this further, we have a number of podcasts that are now available, and one of them talks about the science of cleaning, where in a hospital environment, it's very, very difficult for any robot to really clean in those high risk areas. So we have, in fact, at Alder Hey, we've got these two wonderful robots in the children's ward. One is painted like like Superman, the other one's like Minnie Mouse, and they go around and they clean the floor space during the day, and we have the full tracking data that says if there's a bump in the road, you know, if there's someone standing in the way, they'll go around it and come back to it again. That's super, but the robots will never get into the corners. They'll never get within that last inch of the wall. They also won't be able to clean particularly well under sink areas and in those other parts of the hospital where you know that the quality of cleaning needs to be extremely high. So what that means to us is we can let these robots run. They use a quarter of the water that a human would when cleaning the floors, which is another benefit. But actually what it means is we can then send our cleaning operative to those areas that we know are going to be much more critical and require far more focused and diligent cleaning process to be undertaken. All of this is useful, but it doesn't come from someone sitting in a central office and brainstorming ideas with a flip chart. So at the bottom there, what you'll see is we've been, for the last few years, training and developing a very strong program of yellow belt, green belt, and black belts across the business. We've now trained over 400 individuals, some of which have grown through the organization and become green belts. We've also trained, this last year had 203 what we call accredited yellow belts or certified. That means they've actually gone in and identified processes and opportunities where we can improve things. That's had both hard savings and soft savings in the organization. And in many cases, we've now got clients, very large clients, asking us to take that experience of training our workforce in being aware of where we can improve things and training their frontline teams as well. In fact, last year we completed, I think, 14 significant training courses of over 200 client staff in yellow belt activity and an extra 50 in green belt activities. That's something that underpins all of this. A lot of the things that you see above there wouldn't have been identified to the granularity that they are currently operating had it not been for people that have come out of the business, learnt the skills about reflecting in a critical and considered manner about what can be done better, and then taking those skills back into the business and enhancing the processes that we got in place. Have the next slide, please. So what does this mean? The most important thing I've found over the last 10 years is that we have one version of the truth. And we have here at MIT something we call Mosaic, so it brings in all our different data points. But the one version of the truth piece is because all organizations spend an awful lot of time saying, you know, is that data really right? Auditing whether or not the findings are accurate and so on. And we really needed to get rid of all of that. So something that MIT had done way before I even joined was create Mosaic, which is the one version of the truth. If the data point's in there, we know it's accurate. Our data team here have spent the last 2.5 years, which is a significant amount of time and investment, categorizing our data, collating it in a way consistent across different accounts, across different regions, and across different activity types, so that when we say how much time does it take per square foot to clean this space, we can look at it across the account, we can look at it across the type of space, we can look at it across the regional location. And we are very, very clear on where we need to step in and intervene to make sure that that group is as effective as possible. Second point of having one version of the truth is being able to share best practice. Productivity doesn't just come because someone looks over the fence and says, oh, you do it well, that's great, can you share what you're doing? It has to be driven through a culture of wanting to learn and bringing in people from other parts of the business and saying, what have you done differently? How do you do things differently? Why are you successful? What can I learn? That takes an awful lot of trust. So culture in an organization, when we're talking about driving productivity, is extremely important. You won't be surprised to know that I've worked with numerous organizations in the past where people are quite closed about wanting to share their dirty laundry in public. But actually, in what we see is when you have complete transparency about where we are, there's a great uptake and pull from people wanting to say, hey, how can I improve? Next slide, please. So we talked a little bit around the consistency through shared vision of digital products. I showed all those before, but what does that mean to us internally? Well, it means obviously we want to standardize processes where possible, but to use Dr. McCann's point of view, we are not a great big hulking governance structure in the center defining exactly how everyone operates. It's about identifying those pieces that have common standards and processes that we can those processes that are reasonably similar that we can standardize. And again, using where we know by sector or by location, there are good ways of doing it. We look to standardize those. We're not going to shy away from helping teams to identify where things can be done more effectively. Automation, I've talked a little bit about cobotics rather than robotics. But actually also in standard process and routine tasks, implementation of key applications to do with that we've had in recent months and years around procurement, around a lot of the back office finance pieces have now developed further into looking at how can we slim down and automate the replenishment of our disposable items. So cleaning fluids, bleaches, rags, cleaning cloths, rags, filters. There's a whole piece now that we're looking at about as these things come to their natural completion date or end of life cycle, rather than having a massive storeroom full of them, we're getting data that feeds into the procurement process. We're looking at this right now, I should say, into the procurement process so that the replenishment is automated. Jumping over the next two, scalability is very important. We find that when you're looking across an organization that has multiple locations, multiple clients, multiple skill sets, we can't always increase productivity by 2-3% within teams. Often it's about looking at how we can scale by bringing together clusters of groups. So we're starting to look at things like centers of excellence. We have I'm extremely proud of the center of excellence we have around cleaning in the Midlands, which is probably the only, I believe it's the only one in the UK, where we're doing some really deep testing on technology, on the different types of bleaches, on the applications and so on, so that we can really understand what's going to work and what is scalable. If there are ways of combining activities into dual processes, how can that drive productivity as well? And all of this comes back to quality control. We have a very strong team in the centre that looks at how we comply not just with policy, but with the standards we expect of our teams. So the reason there's our 5,000th vehicle in the bottom right there is to bring this to life a little bit. I wanted to share a challenge that we're seeing. So a lot of people will be aware that there's electric vehicles have their own anxiety around range, around the ability to charge and so on. But as we have stepped into this with both feet and said, we're going to go ahead with this, we needed to start thinking smartly about how do we route our engineers or our cleaning operatives? How do we make sure that the locations that we're sending to are within a day's charge of that vehicle? Now, we started this journey a few years ago, and since then, electric vehicles have grown massively in their capability and capacity and range. But we still have a number of vehicles that can only complete under 200 miles in a day. So scheduling in an activity or a visit at a site where we know there is a charging point next to that site helps the operative make sure that they can charge their vehicle whilst they're on the job, and they can still complete their full day's cycle without having to take time out and sit and wait for the car to charge. So when I talk about standardized processes, centralized information management, it's not just about ensuring the individual is doing their job properly. It's also making sure that the environment which they're working is working to their benefit. Can I have the next slide, please? Now, so Graham asked me to just finish with a couple of points on a personal basis. That's mighty. It's great that I've we've had these other things, and then Dr. McCann's great that you mentioned Krugman as well. He's a little bit of a hero of mine. I think I met him in 1995 or 6, and even then he was talking about productivity isn't everything, but in the long run, it's almost everything. And I reflected on the fact that, productivity over the last few months has risen by 0.9%, and I started digging into it, and there are quite a few papers out there that it's really being driven by consumer demand. So what is productivity, and how can an organization like ours really step in? Well, I see it as 4 key areas. I believe all organizations have to embrace the next wave of technology. AI is not there to replace people. I don't believe that. I don't believe that we're going to be overrun by megalomaniac robots. I think it's about how do we enhance what we do? How do we focus what we do effectively? Similarly, I think we have to invest in future skills. There's no question that my children who are growing up now are going to have a different set of skills, an evolved set of skills than the ones that I grew up with as I was going through school and university. I think we have to broaden our talent pool. When I look at the most effective teams I've worked with, diversity, which I know for some organizations is a buzzword, but diversity is critical. Different ways of thinking, different ways of being effective come from different experiences and different backgrounds. So we must, as a nation, make sure that within our industries, we have as broad a talent pool as possible. And the final point I think is critical, and it's one very, very close to my heart, is that we have to offer development. Hiring someone to do a job on day one, after 2-3 years, that job has to have evolved, and that individual's capabilities have to have evolved. So if we don't offer development, then we will stagnate as an organization, and we will stagnate as a group. So in summary, I'm so happy that even though it wasn't planned, a lot of what we talked about overlapped. I can talk about the Netherlands and their decentralization of key skills and areas, but from which I'd love to at another time, so I'm happy to take direct emails or questions. But from our perspective, I think it comes down to having one version of the truth, being very, very clear on where you can step in and help the frontline teams be more effective, and then making sure that you offer development across a broad across a broad talent pool to be as effective as possible.
Thank you very much, Philip. That was excellent. I'm just looking in the questions. We haven't got any questions, but I thought something that had come to me while I was listening to everybody. And NOCN works in India and has worked in India for about 10 years. So we've had some insight into the Indian skill system. And I'd quite, if Professor Sharma might sort of comment on whether in India you see those sharp differences in terms of productivity between the different states, and your view on the way that skills is evolved in India. I think that would be useful as another example of another country doing something slightly different than Phil McCann's quite accurate description of the UK. So, Professor Sharma.
Yes. First of all, thank you so much, Graham, for putting us together. I was so happy to listen to both Mr. Philip McCann as well as Mr. Philip Hendrick. Both of them reminded me of my days when I was there at Birmingham. Looking at that time, of course, nobody would say that London has become a dark stark, sucking the resources, because a lot was happening around Midland and also at Manchester and Liverpool and several other, including Scotland, Glasgow, etc. But I think the point about centralization and centralized planning is very, very important. We in India are at the cusp of major reforms in this respect. And I find that one of the major reasons why India is growing taller in terms of economic growth is primarily because of taking on board not just those who are here at Delhi, but also those who are in various states of India. And we are drawing, in fact, contours of development for the whole country, and now planning, in fact, how the entire country can be developed, not just the mega cities, which were the prime attraction earlier when Mr. Philip Hendrik might have visited India 30 years ago. At that time, of course, the major concern, major focus was on mega cities. Having said that, let me say that this whole point about focus on output rather than input, in fact, also rings in my mind very well. Here in our university, by choice, we have established a directorate of outcome. And we are looking at, in fact, outcome and focusing on output does not mean that we are neglecting the inputs of the kind that are very much required to ensure that the outcome is both great as well as relevant. Having said this, let me say that yes, in India, the focus on creating the talent pool of people who understand the dynamics of technology integration and embrace the technology innovations of the kind that are happening today, both at the workplace as well as in the university, is very important. So I think as we go by, the productivity movement, in my opinion, we need to connect to the educational institutions and universities and sensitize people right at that stage when they are beginning to prepare for their career, to keep the consciousness of productivity, of course, as the prime mover of growth and development. But let me also say that while productivity and profit and turnovers are important, it's also important that the well-being and welfare of the people and the well-being of the planet is also kept in focus. And we need to build up this kind of mindset through the skills that we create in our workforce as well as in our workforce of the future rolling out of the university. So this is, I think, an agenda. And thank you so much for, in fact, putting us face to face to the futuristic requirement for productivity skills that should go beyond technology. They should go beyond skilling, in fact, people for discharging their responsibilities efficiently and effectively at the workplace, but also behave as human beings and care for the society and the planet at the same time. So that's where we require a lot of new character skills and behavioral skills of the kind on top of technology intensive skills, which are surfacing, in fact, as very important priorities today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Sharma. I've got a question for both Philips. I'll start with Phil McCann, and we're coming close, I know, to our time, but I think I'd quite like to understand, Philip, your view. We heard a lot about the circular economy, the linking of net zero, productivity, digitization in India, and your sort of view of, do you see much of that in the UK experience with our skills policies? Do you see that sort of connectivity or not? I have my own views, but I'd love to hear yours. Yeah. Can you hear us?
Well, in terms of the skills agenda, yeah, I can hear you. Can you hear me, Graham?
Yeah, I can. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
You can hear me. Yeah. Well, in terms of the specific skills agenda, of course, you know a lot more than I do, but in terms of the overall framing nationally, the overall architecture, the framing politically in terms of narratives within which the skills programs and agendas actually sit as a crucial part. I think there's a lot of discussion about these things, but I'm not sure quite how far they're really generating real traction. So, for example, I'm part of the Pissarides Review, the Institute for the Future of Work, who are looking at technological shocks and what that implies in terms of skills, human capital, so exactly the area that you and your teams are working in. What we can see is there's a very, very strong regional dimension to the balance of risks and opportunities coming down the track in the UK case. And it's very much in favour of the more prosperous places where the risks are relatively lower and the opportunities are greater. And you see exactly the same thing, not only in terms of technological disruption, but also in terms of the sustainable transitions. So the weaker parts of the UK are more exposed in terms of lower opportunities and greater risks to the green transitions themselves. So, of course, you can understand immediately why people may not want to support activities in this direction because it their localities face very, very severe threats and challenges. So what I would like to see is a much more proactive story about, okay, this is the reality, this is the kind of landscape of challenges we're facing, and in the big picture, going down to detailed discussions, how are we going to address this? What specifically are we going to do? And I would very much be in favor of a much more radical shift to a much more devolved autonomy in terms of decision makers being able to develop and implement programs and policies with the legal barriers, with the legal defense mechanisms, with the proper resources to do it. You have to get the employers and the skills providers people all around the table together with the hospitals, the anchor institutions, civil society groups working in the kind of skills arena. It seems to me there's no other way to do this, because the challenges in Manchester are not the same as those in London. Parts of Scotland are very, very different to the southwest of England. You need conversations which are really bespoke, tailored to what we understand those challenges are in those localities. I don't see you can have a nationwide approach to these. It doesn't make any sense to me.
Thank you, Philip. The other Philip, are you okay to hold on a few minutes?
Yeah, of course.
How are you for time? Yep.
Fine.
I've got a question.
Do you mind if I just step in one brief moment into what
Yes,
Philip
please.
Anderson
Yes, that would be lovely.
I totally 100%. I don't know if
yeah.
people on the call are aware of what they've been doing in the Netherlands over the last 8-10 years, which is regionally identifying what their primary industry focuses are going to be for the next 25 years. I think being European, that actually that is a model that has its pros and cons as well. If you happen to be one part of the Netherlands and farming and agriculture is the bit that you want to grow up in, which is one of my cousins, he's not particularly enjoying becoming a mushroom farmer. But I think there are swings and roundabouts to it. But the point being, coming back to the Mighty view, we believe, and I've also echoed this massively on a personal level, we must invest in apprenticeships, where it's not just through a degree program, where it's not just through some certification, but actually experiential learning for some of these key things are going to be critical over the next 20 years. And the vacillation from central government and the confusion in other places is unhelpful, because it means that people can't plan for the future going forward.
Thanks, Philip.
Right.
We've got a question.
I should say, Philip, I was just going to say, I lived in the Netherlands for 8 years. I was at the University of Groningen, so that's why, I mean, these examples I use came from observing many things taking place both in Germany and the Netherlands. So
there you go.
Well, is it Sudoku Barnes? I'm not sure if I pronounced your name right. You've got your hand up. Can you speak? Are you able to speak? Yeah.
Yes, I am.
Yes,
good afternoon.
okay.
Good afternoon from a sunny South Africa. Colleague, my name is Barnes. I'm from an academic institution called University of South Africa, and I am a fellow of WEPS. Have been for close to 15 years. Thank you, gentlemen, for fantastic inputs today. Really welcome. I missed a few parts of it due to some meetings that I had to attend. However, I agree with Prof. Sharma when he speaks about taking the productivity concept, the whole concept to academia, to the universities. It's so critical right now because our qualifications, let's take, for example, the operations management qualification. Productivity is one of the crucial topics amongst them. And I can tell you, I come from the Department of Operations Management at UNISA, and we teach it on a very high level. And now more than ever, post-COVID-19, we see the necessity for implementation of productivity interventions in organizations. Now, I also sit on 2 committees at Productivity South Africa. It's an organization, a state-owned enterprise that's mandated by government to assist organizations that are floundering, organizations that are starting up, and organizations that are also stable. So to assist them to get back on track, so to prevent the issue of closures and the subsequent job losses that come with it. So in South Africa right now, we are beset by huge service delivery protests. And it comes down to the basic productivity interventions. We don't have our government departments that are measuring the productivity. Now we want to take that concept to them, take this message to them. Let us assist you, let us guide you, see what intervention you can put in place so you can improve the effectiveness. And that exact same thing goes for our manufacturing industries. We've seen COVID-19 leaving the manufacturing landscape devastated with closures. We've seen what an impact it had. And I mean, in South Africa right now, the carcasses of organizations that have floundered, they fill the manufacturing landscape. And we cannot afford that, where we are struggling with foreign direct investments. And here comes the secret of productivity interventions. Let us assist, let us guide. What can we implement? How? Use us, the productivity South Africa. Use the universities, like Prof. Sharma said, to see to what extent we can assist organizations, government, to ensure efficiency, effectiveness, and finally sustainability. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you very much. I'll send you some information. Somebody that's worked in South Africa in the past, and actually my sister-in-law lives in the Limpopo, so I know the country quite well, but I'll send you some further information. Thank you very much to our three speakers. I think we've had an excellent discussion and debate, three different viewpoints, but a lot of commonality and a lot of ideas merging there together. I thank you very much for your time and effort preparing your slides, delivering them excellently, and actually getting people some really good things to take away and reflect upon. Thank you very much, all three of you. And I hope to see you all again. Thank you very much. Hope you've all enjoyed the event. Bye.
Thank you very much, Prof.
Yeah,
bye.
Bye. Bye.
Thank you for the great opportunity. Thank you so much indeed.
Thank you, Professor Sharma.